Hello, this is Edward Kranz, the Honey Badger Binder of BOOKFORGE, and today we're going to be discussing making Egyptian papyrus scrolls, or rolls, some call them rolls. A little bit about me. My name is Edward Kranz. I am a traditional hand bookbinder. I've been practicing bookbinding since 2012. I got into it because I was an avid reader, avid collector. I would get books, they would need some work. I realized that to repair books, I needed to understand how they were actually made. And I didn't realize the rabbit hole that I was actually heading down. Between the materials, the tools, the time, if you're not just doing it for fun and as a craft, you actually want to get into the trade and understand the process and understand the history and the materials, and you want to be accurate. It can be quite daunting. So to repair these books, I learned how to bookbind. My very expensive hobby kept growing. At the time that I started, I was an aircraft mechanic at the Boeing company. I moved into an analyst position where I remained for the remainder of my time there. I have a background in fine art. I was fairly well known in Seattle as a coffee artist, and that's a topic for another day. Yeah, I also have a background in design. I had a design company in Seattle called Khaki Media and Design, and I worked for big companies like Microsoft and Datalight and a whole bunch of other little companies that you may or may not have ever heard of. I did a lot of corporate video presentations, motion graphics, and that kind of thing. Now, this was back in 2000, just before 2000, during the dot-com crash. Yeah, it was an interesting time. So I bring a lot of skills. And prior to that, I had a construction company for over a decade. So bring a lot of skills to the bookbinding table. One of the things that I did a lot of at the Boeing company was I was an instructor. I led workshops. I taught safety classes. I think one of my favorite classes was accident investigation. We would set up scenes. I would teach people how to look and interrogate what they're actually seeing to get to the root cause, because usually what you think is the root cause is not the root cause. You need to go whys, 5 whys deep. So yeah, I got into bookbinding. I do it full time now. I got out of corporate America for personal and health reasons. Very much happier now. I get to make fun things like this. I got into making these scrolls because as we're working on old 16, 17, 18th century books, it can be frustrating. You're working with fragile materials. You're working with difficult processes that change from book to book, depending on what they need. And sometimes you just need to step back and do something for your mind. And I was like, okay, what can I do? And I started making these scrolls. I got interested in papyrus and scrolls. I love ancient structures. We'll talk about different ancient structures, but like this one here, right, as I'm backlit, which is not ideal. This is a replica, modern sympathetic replica of a Nag Hammadi, and it's made with papyrus. And we'll get to this in a minute. Medieval books, I love the old stuff. So started making the scrolls, and the more research I did, I realized there's not a lot of information, not a lot of information online. This course is a culmination of everything that I found online, and I'm now starting to look to academia for more answers and more details. And later on this year, probably in the fall, I'll do an addendum to this particular demonstration where I'll add on any of the new information that I've found. And the folks that have signed up for this And of course, if you're watching this on Patreon, you'll have access to whatever information I find. So let's get into this. Papyrus. So this is a sheet of papyrus. Actually, it's two sheets put together. And I think if you can see, there's this grid or crosswork pattern to it. And what that is are the two layers of the papyrus. So it's I know it's funny. You have papyrus, the plant, which the papyrus, the paper, is made from. So when I say papyrus, which one am I talking about? So papyrus is a plant that grew in the Nile, grows in the Nile. I use both for a reason. It's funny because you're talking 3,000 years BC. They were writing on papyrus, and it was the main thing until we started getting into codices, and that's kind of what the Nag Hammadi here is a codice. But they found that papyrus was brittle when folded like that. So this here is a very thick quire or signature grouping of papyrus. And this is how things like the Nag Hammadi and other religious texts were made back then. Because if you only took a sheet, or let's say 4, and you folded it in half like you would a traditional book. Now, I don't know if you can see it split. And honestly, there, boom. See, I go back and forth a couple times, and you can already see it's just boom, comes apart. So you need to have a really thick quire. Well, this was impractical, especially as you got into thicker text. And so they moved on to materials like vellum and eventually, handmade cotton rag, etc., linen. So at a certain point, once we started moving into the codices, they stopped using papyrus as a writing material. Well, they stopped farming it, they neglected it, and it went extinct. So the papyrus that they used in ancient Egypt doesn't exist anymore. And there's a scientific name for it. I'll put it in the notes. Yeah, so papyrus went extinct. Now, luckily, and I want to say it was France. Yeah, France had taken some papyrus plants and they were growing papyrus there. Well, when Egypt realized that this was part of their culture and part of their heritage, they went to France, they brought some plants back. Now, time had passed, the plants changed and evolved. So the plants that are growing in Egypt today, that they produce the papyrus that I'm working with, while this papyrus came from Egypt, I have a certificate of authenticity, which I found quite charming, is actually French papyrus, because the plant had changed enough over time that it actually has a different scientific name, and or is a variation of the original scientific name. So I'm going to give you a little bit of history on, well, maybe not history, but we're going to talk about the grading and the cultural significance of the different types of papyrus. Now, there's 3 main grades. I'm going to try and get these names right. I do not speak Egyptian. I do not speak Greek. So please forgive me. I'll put the spellings of these words in the notes when I send them out. The first grade is hieratic or hieratic, and it's made from the center of the stalk. It's slightly thicker than the other grades. and it's from the midsection of the stock. It was mainly used for literary works, administrative records, the day-to-day minutia of the bureaucracy, and it was used for literary works. Now, there is a higher grade, and I feel that it's part of this theoretic grade, and it was called Byblos, and it originated from the Phoenician port about 300 to 60 BC, Hellenistic period, and it was reserved for royal decrees, it was religious texts, and poems. And it's funny I say poems. There's a girl on TikTok who does poems and talks about them, and her actual stick is Scots language. And oh, it decided to move. That's awesome. So bothered me. So she would be discussing the Scots language, and she's a poet, and she gets a lot of guff because she says poems. Okay, so that was a complete sidetrack. What I do want to say is this was a divine quality, and we'll get into the cultural significance of divinity and the class system. All right, so we talked about the Byblos, we talked about the hieratic, and then there was another really good, and I want to say it's a subset of the hieratic, and that is, and I'm going to mess this up because it's kind of like amphitheater, but it's amphitheatic, and it was produced in Rome, and by a Roman named Fanius. He was a grammarian, and he came up with his own papyrus, where instead of having the 2 layers, he added a third, and somehow this became finer. So I'm not exactly sure if it's processed as part of what I need to do to continue my education is research into that. But it was a very high quality. So those were the high quality ones. Now, the mid-grade, we're talking about demotic, and that is in the upper regions of the stock. It's coarse, it's less refined. So while I would consider this, and I realize you cannot see the texture on the camera, I consider this to be hieratic. I consider this, on the other hand, and you can probably see from the edge, I consider this to be demotic or satic. And it's rougher, it's coarse, it's not as refined. This was reserved for the common people. They would use this for accounts of trade, letters, bills, receipts, that kind of thing. And the satic, it came from Upper Egypt, and it was made from scraps. It was very rough. We're now getting into a quality that I don't know. If you use at home, I wouldn't give it to someone. Now, there's another one called Tenotic, and that papyrus came from not the center, but more towards the skin. Once you cut the outer skin off, the skin itself was used for making baskets and shoes or slippers. It was really strong, but not good at all for paper. So it was so bad that they didn't sell it by quality. They sold it by weight. So that should tell you something. So the last, Emporic, it was useless for writing. It was used for things like envelopes, and merchants would wrap products in it. So those are kind of the grades of your papyrus. Now, if you go back to ancient Egypt, um, their culture was definitely a class or a caste system, and that kind of thinking really went over into the world of things like papyrus, where the pharaohs, the thinkers, the well-to-do, they would get this biblos or heretic quality, and it was really nice. And then as you went further down, the businessmen would have the heretic and the amplific. Not bad, but think of it as your common copy paper, I guess. And then, the kids and the lower classes, they would have, is that mine? It is. Sorry about that. So they would have the demotic, the Sidic, and that kind of paper. So you go from the divine to the bureaucracy and literacy to the very common lives. And so you've got this broke up into that class system. All right. So a little bit of background, a little bit of history. Dry throat. I haven't spoke this much in quite a while. Okay, so we are going to get into the anatomy of a scroll. All right, so if you have a single sheet, I realize this is a double sheet, but let's pretend this is just one sheet. This would be referred to as a Kollema. One sheet. Oh, here we go. This is much better. So this is a Kollema. And if you're wondering if you can print on papyrus, I took this image offline. It's not mine. And I printed it out. Now, I do not have a particularly great printer. It took me a couple efforts, and you can see through, there's some really thick. Now, this is kind of that mid-grade I was talking about. It's thicker, it's heavier, it's coarser, but this went through my printer. All right, so a single sheet is called a Kollema. So if you just had a letter or whatever it was on, it would be on a Kollema. On a related note, I bought this off of Amazon, and when I send the notes out, I'll send a link to how to get this, and I get this directly from a maker in Egypt. I'll include their information. So don't worry about it. You'll know where to get this particular material. This is less expensive. If you're just going to start around and play with it, I'd recommend doing this. This is a little bit more expensive, but I'm sure it would go through a printer much easier than this did. All right, so when you take your Kollema and you put them together like this, and I think you can see in the center where it's overlapped, it's a little thicker, and that is a Kollesis. That is the joint. So two Kollema together at the Kollesis. All right. So you may have noticed, I guess we'll keep this up. We had talked about, you can see the strips going one direction and then the strips going the other direction. Okay, and that has to do with how the papyrus is made, and I'll talk about that in a moment. When you put your pages together, your Kollema together, you want to make sure that your writing side, the strips are going horizontal, okay? And that is going to be your Recto. Now, you may recognize that from a regular paper or book. You have your Recto and you have your Verso, right? So you want to, and let's see, I need to get my glasses on. So for me, this would be my Recto side. And I would be able to write because it would go in line with the strips. Now the other side, and it should be perpendicular. That's your verso. Now, typically the verso is left blank. It was not uncommon though to write on the verso. Just because your strips are going perpendicular to your horizontals doesn't mean you can't write on it. It just means when you make it, it's more acceptable to have the writing surface go in line with your writing. So writing sign, recto. Backside, verso. Okay. So what makes a recto and verso? So when they put together, I wish I had, excuse me. Let's do this. I'm going to switch to the overview. All right, and I'm going to get rid of the keyboard because I do not need that. Let's take what I'm going to do. I'm going to that. All right. So when they make papyrus, you would have this stock, all right, and it's, I don't know, ½ inch to 1 inch in diameter. I've never seen one live and in person, but that's okay. So just imagine a stock sticking out of the ground, roughly 1 inch or under in diameter. They would cut off the outer skin, and that skin would go and get used for sandals, baskets, whatever. They would then take the center material and they would slice it really thin. They would take a mallet and they would pound it out, and this would get all the water out of it. And then they would take a roller, a rolling pin, and they would roll it really thin, again, pushing as much of that moisture out as possible. Now, the papyrus plant is like 25 to 30% sugar. I think I mentioned this before, and that's a lot. So what they do is they take those strips and they throw them into a vat of water. Now, they'll leave them in the vat 3 to 6 days, and then they'll change the water out and they'll put them in the vat again for another 3 to 6 days. How long it stays in the water determines how much sugar is pulled out. It also determines the brightness. So do you have a darker colored paper or do you have a lighter colored paper? And it's really funny, the research I've done, I've come up with conflicting responses. The longer it's in, one guy says it's darker, the other guy says it's lighter. I need to do more research on that. I'll get a more definite answer. So once they've soaked these strips that they've cut out of the reed, they would be wet. Now, keep that in mind. These pieces are dry. I'm just doing this as an example. They would then take the strips, and now I've seen it done 2 ways. The first way that I've seen it, and this is probably ancient Egypt, is they will do a weave, almost like a basket. Okay. The other way, and this is the way that all the papyrus that I have has been constructed, is they would take the strips and they would lay, let's say the recto strips out, And then they would come over, and on top of that, now, if these were wet, they'd stick a little bit better. And well, there we go. So recto strips, verso strips, because I want to write along this way. But they would take these wet strips, and then they would put it between two carpets, and then they'd put it between these boards and under a heavy rock. You'd have presses back then. And they would leave it under the press for 3 days or so, and then they would take it out, and voila, they would have sheets of papyrus. So that's how the papyrus was made. I would love to do a video of making papyrus, but the sad thing is you have to have fresh papyrus stalks to do it. Papyrus does not last very well, very long, and it really needs to be fresh. So when you cut it and you make the strips, it's all good. So I don't know. We'll see. Maybe one of these days we'll be able to put it. I'm not a huge fan of having the mat on the table if I'm not cutting. All right, so we have recto, verso. We discussed how papyrus was made at a very high level. But this will be key later on. So I'll be discussing how we attach the Kollema together. And that's been an interesting topic for me because I'm all about process. I know how I do it. I know how these were made, but I wanted to know how the ancient Egyptians did it to make a historically accurate. I consider these modernly sympathetic scrolls. Okay, so I think we're going to be getting into making the scroll now. We got a couple other pieces I think we should discuss. When you're making a scroll, so let's take, we'll take one of these apart. All right, so you have your scroll. And now this does not have an umbilicus. An umbilicus would be the wooden stick or dowel that you sometimes see on them, like this. Now, this one has finials, not necessarily needed. Those are definitely not historically accurate. But so the wooden stick would be an umbilicus. Now, the first page or two, the first Kollema or two, would most likely be blank. Now, I am guessing they did this for a variety of reasons. One, if this is wrapped around the stick, it might get a lot of wear and tear, it might break, and you'd be attached to the stick as it breaks and whittles down. Or maybe it was just an aesthetic preference. I'm not 100% sure about that. So these unwritten sheets are called proto-Kollema. And if I pronounce it correctly, I did go online. I typed a lot of these in because I'm not a native, like I said, Greek speaker, and a lot of these terms are Greek. And so I'm doing the best I can with them. So if you hear something that sounds funny, please forgive me. Now, if our scrolls had decorative borders, let's just going to quickly tie this up. I'm not going to be too fussy about it. So if our scrolls had decorative borders, so let's say this Kollema, if it had a colored strip or ornamentation along the top, along the bottom, that would be called titulus. Yeah, no, funny word. Now I don't have any, but that would be another part of the scroll, and it's just ornamentation, decoration. All right, so let's see, am I missing any vocabulary? I don't think so. I think we're going to start making some scrolls. All right, the first way I'm going to show you is how I've been making them historically. I am going to talk about how I think they were made. Like I said, there's not a whole lot of information on the process of ancient scroll making. I originally was guessing that when you joined your Kollema together, that they would, obviously they'd use an adhesive, right? And the adhesive would probably be starch based, like a rice starch, or something indigenous to the Egyptian Nile Valley. And so I started using wheat starch, rice starch, whatever I had on hand. And I would use that to attach my Kollema together. Well, as I was doing my research, I'm like, there's got to be something more to it. And I started watching the videos and gathering information on how papyrus was actually made, because I felt that was important. And when they laid these strips out and they pressed them, they relied on the natural sugars of the stock to act as the binding agent, as the adhesive. So I'm like, I wonder if that's just how they put the Kollema together and made the Kollesis. So I took a couple sheets, and I just did this week. I took a couple sheets and I wet the edge for about an inch overlap for my Kollesis. And I made sure it was nice and saturated, and I put it between two blotters, and I stuck it in the book press, and I left it there for 3 days. And I took it out, and I mean, it's, you can see that going, it's not given, it's attached. And it gave a really, really nice transition from one Kollema to the other. And if you use PVA or you use too heavy of a wheat starch or wheat paste or rice starch or paste, you can get the area where the Kollesis is will definitely take on the curvature roll of the roll, and it'll be a little bit thicker there. And while I don't think it's horrible, I definitely like this method better. Now the caveat is, and you'll see, we're going to sit and we're going to glue out and you can make a scroll in a day. And that's even with the drying time, which we're going to get into in a minute. If you do it this way, unless you've got, like, if you're going to make a 10 Kollema scroll, you're going to have 10 Kollesis or 9 Kollesis, and you're going to need 9 or 10 sets of boards and heavy rocks, or or you're going to have to do it piecemeal in a press. It becomes time consuming just to make one scroll. And so, yeah, I mean, I guess it depends on how accurate historically you want to be and how much time you have to make your scroll. So what we're going to do today for this particular exercise, now that all the talking has been done and my voice is almost gone, you can decide whether you're going to do quick and easy, or you're going to take time and make something a little bit more, what I believe, because I don't know, to be more historically accurate. I'm going to reach out there's a gentleman who's the head conservator at the Bibliotheca Alexandria in Cairo, and he's very very prolific on some of the Facebook bookbinding groups. He has a conservator group on Facebook, and I'm going to ask him if I'm on the right chat. I'll let you know. All right. Okay. So we're going to make a 10 panel 10 Kollema scroll, and I'm going to start off with, now when I buy this, I've already cut this in half, so when I buy this, it's actually that big. But what I haven't done is I've got one edge that's straight. Now I highly recommend, because when your papyrus comes, the consistency in the edges, one sheet might be 9 inches, the next might be 9.5. It varies a little bit. So if you want a consistency and a nice clean edge, I highly recommend trimming it down. Now, the area that overlaps your Kollesis, I would recommend not trimming, because a lot of it thins out at the edge. See if you can see that. So that top edge, and it makes a really nice transition. If you cut a hard edge, I think you're going to see it and feel it as you're writing. Now, I guess we should talk about this aspect of it. Traditionally, your scrolls were roughly 20 Kollesis long. Now, 20 Kollema long. And this is it. This is a 20 or a 10. This is a 10 Kollema roll, and you can see, I mean, I have it wound pretty tight, and it's pretty thick. So that would make a scroll that looks about this. Now, if you double it, I mean, it's going to be a pretty impressive, pretty thick scroll. So for my purposes, I find that 10 Kollema just fine. But it's the scribe who determines how long it is. So if he needs 8, it's going to be 8. If he needs 10, 15, 20, that's what it's going to be. Your average scroll is about 20 Kollema. Now, your longest one, let me look this up here. The longest ancient Egyptian roll was about 40 meters. Now it's 131 feet in old money, right? So that's a big scroll. Greek rolls were roughly 11 meters or 36 feet. All right, so what we're going to do now, there. I'm going to get my edges lined up. I'm going to grab a weight. I'll be right back. I apologize. One thing I didn't have on my table. A little bit easier. I'm going to switch to the overhead for you. Let's see, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. So I'm going to cut this down to 8. You want to make sure you have a sharp blade. Papyrus cuts very easy. And I hadn't really thought about it, but I cut these strips all the time. So now I'm thinking about keeping them. I used to just ditch them, and maybe I'll make my own papyrus out of these strips. We'll see how that goes. Now I'm going to leave these edges. I'm going to take off stray stuff like that, but I'm going to leave them. So the top and the bottom, essentially what would be up against your finials, if you have them. We're going to attach this long lines. You'll need some form of adhesive. PVA is good because it has a little moisture. You can use a wheat starch, you can use a wheat paste. You can use Elmer's white glue if you want it. I mean, it really depends on what you want to do. On my Patreon page, I have videos and information on how to make your own wheat paste, wheat starch, rice paste, rice starch, things like that. And it discusses their different qualities. So if you have not been to the BOOKFORGE Patreon page, it's definitely it's a building resource, a lot of educational material for bookbinding, book reservation, conservation, that kind of thing. Okay, so we've cut. I think there's 5 in this stack. There should be 5. We're going to kind of do this baking style, where I'm going to glue together 5. We're going to set it aside and let it dry, and then I'm going to take out 2 rolls of 5, combine them together to make 10. Well, set that aside while it dries. And we're going to take out a roll that I've already dried with 10, and we'll continue from there. So what I've done so far, just recapping, is I've taken 5 sheets, I've cut the top and the bottom, so I have an even thickness or width across the length of the scroll. So now what I'm going to do stick these aside. You'll probably want a paper of some sort to do your gluing on. I'm going to do it. I'm going to grab a sheet of paper of some sort. I'll be right back. Okay, so it's just a piece of wax paper. Set that up there. Now, when you're putting your Kollema together, you want your Kollesis to overlap enough to hold it. I figure anywhere between ½ inch and 1 inch is more than fine. You want to determine which side is your Recto and which side is your Verso. And you want your left to overlap the right. So as I put this down, and usually what I do is you want an edge that you can line up, and it's a straight edge. Because when you lay your second sheet down, you want to be able to keep it straight. And when you start getting out, 5, 10, 15 feet, it becomes a little bit daunting. Move some of this stuff out of the way. I'm going to basically do a brush width, and I put quite a bit on, and then I brush it off. So I want it to be saturated, but I don't want it to have a lot of, for lack of a better term, we're going to call it squeeze out. Okay, and I'm going to slide this underneath there to about where it should be. I'm going to make sure that I'm even with the bottom edge. I'm going to press this down. Now, yeah, put that there. That'll hold that. You want to something like a bone folder, a Teflon folder, or something, and you're going to use that to flatten your Kollesis. Now you can, if you get a little bit of extra glue on there, just have a damp rag and wipe it. This rag is a little excessive, but sometimes, but you don't want to do it too much because once you get this stuff damp, it becomes very pliable and very, very movable. So we've now got 2 Kollema, 1 Kollesis. And then all you do, step that out of the way, slide this down, make sure I'm lined up. We're gonna do the same thing. So this is kind of one of those situations where it's a lot of rinse and repeat. Like I said, you always want your left to overlap your right. You want it to be roughly a ½ inch to an inch. It depends on the cut of the edge. Sometimes the edge varies enough that you really want more of an overlap, or in some cases, you may have to trim it. I do this, I make sure I get it all flattened out. I take my rag, get rid of any excess paste or glue. All right, so I'm going to do this several more times. But what you really want to do is work quickly. You want to get your Kollesis underweight. A lot of times I will put it under boards and weights, which I'll show you in a minute. As I'm going, and I'll work with everything to my left being underweight as I'm working down the table. It really depends on what kind of work surface you have. If you're able to do that, if you have a small table, it may end up falling over the edge, which is fine. Like right now, I'm using the edge of my cutting mat to make sure that everything is in line. Usually what I do is I don't work on cutting mats when I'm not cutting. Personal preference, but what I end up doing is working on the edge of the table here. Oop. Sitting with the rag necessary? Not really. All right, so we got one more. Having weights to keep everything in line, kind of like having a third hand. Okay, so we now have five Kollema glued together. All right. Now, what you really want to do is, if you don't, you'll end up with wrinkles. Is you want to take your Kollema. Now, whether you have it under your weight, say I don't want that one wet. Sit this down here for a minute. Put some sort of release barrier. You know, put a board, and on each board you want to put a decent weight, and you're going to do that at each Kollesis. So you want to have, you know, at least 5 boards ready. These are just nice plywood boards that I cut. And you want to leave it like this until it dries. Now, for the sake of what we're doing in the conservation of space, I'm going to take this, I'm going to set it over there to dry, and I'll come back to this later. Now, this stuff, you can hang it over something, it's in that, that'd be fine. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hang it over this light. Okay, so you just watched, I glued together 5, that's great. But what you really want is 2 sets of 5. So you're going to do that twice, and you're going to end up with the equivalent of 2 rolls. Actually, 2 rolls. Now, I'm not going to unfurl these. You realize that it's 5 long. And then once you have, well, I suppose I can do that. I should join them. I'll join them. I'm sorry. Take this one apart and this one apart. Okay. That down there. That relatively straight. Wet sheet. You want the overlap to be far enough that you get a good bite into the double layer. The single layer edge is really good heat for the transition, but you want that solid bite. Okay, so we've now attached 2 5s. And the ideal thing to do with this is to put it under weight. Minimum 20 minutes, but honestly, I would give it a couple hours to completely dry, especially before you roll it. If you roll it wet, you're going to have a permanent cupping of however tight that roll was into your Kollesis. And yeah, just not good. I don't think you like it at all. But what I'm going to do is leave this under the pressure for a minute. Set this aside, have some water. Okay, so what we've done, we've taken 2 Kollemas, 5 of them actually, and we've joined them, Kollesis. So we had 2 sets of 5, took the 2 sets of 5, we glued them together. We now have a roll or a scroll of 10 Kollema. Now, typically, the writing would be done on the Kollema before they're joined. So you'd already know how many pages are on the book. So if you made a scroll, and let's say you made it 20 Kollema long, and you found out that, oh, well, you only needed 8 for this particular text, you'd end up with all this extra material. Now you could cut it off, but it just seems extra laborious, right? Egyptian text was written in columns. So if you made a scroll, a lot of people will use things like this for weddings, role playing, the Society of Creative Anachronisms, cosplay, just all kinds of reasons that people get these scrolls. I've made a couple as movie or set props for television shows. I had one appear, I can't remember, season 2, episode 4 of The Game. It was interesting. It was used in a wedding ceremony, but not in the way that you would think. The gentleman took a scroll and listed out all of the groom's conquests over the years, and it was considerable. Hundreds of names were on this scroll, and it was used as a major bash. It was brutal. Okay, so we now have our scroll, our roll. Now, a lot of Egyptian scrolls were just that. Boom, done. This is your scroll. It would look, all right. It might sit on the shelf and look a little bit like this. Yeah, just that's it. Now, some had an umbilicus. The umbilicus is the wooden dowel that would go and you would roll it up. Most umbilicus were unattached. They just used it as a support. Some of them had finials, but not necessarily. You could just have the stick or the dowel. Some, the finials were just wooden discs. If you look at Torah scrolls, they had big wooden discs. I mean, but they were also really huge scrolls. These are small. This is average size for a scroll. 8 to 10 inches was very common. It was rare that you had a scroll that reached 12 inches, but this was pretty much the max. I'm not saying larger ones didn't exist. I'm just saying it was not common. 8 to 12 inches, that's your range of how big your scroll is. We already talked about the length. Historically, what they know is the longest versus what your average is. So for the most part, the scroll making demonstration is over. What I am going to do at this point is I'm going to take it a little bit further, and we are going to create the umbilicus and put finials on it. Now the finials, there's 2 different shapes if you look at them, pointy versus round. I have other, you can have a finial that is just like a cap. Now, these are not necessarily historically accurate. These are purchased commercially. I either bought them at on Amazon or a local hardware store. But you can get them. So here's a set. All right. These are a little bit more narrow than our friends here. Now, if you're going to make a scroll with an umbilicus at either end, you want a finial that is thinner, like that or like that. And the reason for that is if you have two knobby, so you have two knobby scrolls or finials, they kind of hit each other, and either you have this gap, but when you tie them together, now I'm using a hemp cord for most of mine. I think traditionally they use either a leather cord or linen, a linen ribbon or strap. But depending on how thick, if you have a really thick scroll and the material pushed it apart, that's great. But like this, if I had half it on this side and half it on this side, they would end up, it just doesn't work very well. So my recommendation would be a thinner. I love these guys. When I make scrolls for weddings or special events, a lot of times these are absolutely beautiful. They're cheap. They cost a little bit more, where you can get a set of these for $4 or $6, somewhere in that neighborhood. These are probably $15 for a set. And if you make a scroll with two umbilicus with finials, obviously you're going to double the cost. The doweling is relatively expensive. This one here is, 50 cents, and I think it's or 50 cents or $1. And it's what do you call pine? Sorry. A lot of times for my scrolls, I buy the doweling. You can buy an oak dowel for $4 or something like that, and I cut these down. So that's what we're going to do. We're going to get into making an umbilicus with finials. All right. So you'll also notice, or here, let's see even better. This one is natural. This one is dark. I dyed this. So I would either use a wood stain, which I do on a lot of mine, or I use Thebes leather dye, and I just do that. This is two different, see that? I know I'm backlit. Two different shades of Thebes are on these. The teak ones, I love the way they look, just the way they are. I would not dye these, but everybody's free to do what they want. Now, the process that I'm going to be using, you'll notice there's a really thin part in there. And when you're drilling these out, that can be problematic. If you're going to use these, you probably, this is a 1/2 inch dowel, which is my standard. I would kind of gauge how much that centerpiece is, or just not go as deep, one or the other. But you either need to use a thinner dowel or don't go as deep. And we'll get into how I determine how I gauge my depth here in a moment. Okay. I need our hands. So book press, lying press, or a finishing press. This is actually a finishing press. And so what I want to do, while this is drying, I have a scroll here that I made earlier. This is a full 10. Actually, I miscounted. I think I made it 11. Do this one or that one is 11. But I need to figure out how long this is. So I'm going to make sure that it's sitting nice and even. Wrap it back up real quick. And I had a ruler here somewhere. So I want to go outermost to outermost. And I'm going to call this 8 3/4. And I realize you can't see what I'm seeing. I want to make sure that the scroll fits between it and fits comfortably because they don't always roll up with a perfect edge. So I give it about a 16th on either side, or a couple millimeters on either side. So I'm going to call this 8 3/4. That's how long we want the dowel to be at the scroll. Now, we also want to add the amount of depth you're going to go into the finial. So we're going to cut this nub off, and we want to go in, I'm going to say 1/2 inch. So since this is 8 3/4, I'm going to cut my dowel 9 3/4. So to measure this out, all this that lined up, I'm doing 9 3/4. All right, so I have a small workshop in the garage, and I would do the wood work for this there. But since this is bench work and you need to see what I'm doing, I'm going to do that here. Now, this is not the saw that I usually use. It's kind of a brute. I have a Japanese fine saw that I usually use for this kind of work, but I can't find it right now, and I needed to do this demonstration. So I'm just going to take my time with this brute. It's okay if the edge isn't perfectly beautiful. It's going to go in the finial. All right. That side. Okay, so we now have a dowel. So with this dowel, we now need to put this together. Okay. So we're going to start working on these guys. First thing I need to do is, actually, you know what? Now we'll use, where'd the other one go? Did I not have a second one out? I did not have the second one out. I apologize. There we go. Now we got 2 of them. So we're going to work these. I have I thought I got one out. It's going to be a little bit rough. Like I said, I have a workshop that I usually do this in. So I'm just trying to sort out how this is going to work. Okay, there's that. And my finer Japanese saw would be much better suited for this. change the camera angle. For the second one, so you can see it from the other angle. This is a horrible way of doing this. If I do another video like this, I'll come up with a better way of holding these. Like I said, if I use my other saw, it'd be a lot easier. Cuts through this like butter. It's got a very fine edge. Go. All right. Do the second one. And no, that's not what I had some rubber matting that I was going to put in here. I thought I laid it out. Change angles. There we go. Book presses aren't the greatest to use as a vise. How you get this thing off is up to you. All right. So personally, what I would do at this point is I would get some sandpaper, and I think that's might do that. I'm gonna get some sandpaper for this. Step this down for a second. To fit into the flat surface a little bit more than I usually do. All right, so we now have two finials with flat edges and umbilicus. All right, so the next step, we need to put a hole in here. Again, this is fun and tricky. I would normally do this in the garage. Again, I put this thing in the book press because that's what I have. I'm going to get a trusty drill. And I already know that my umbilicus is a 1/2 inch. So that's my 1/2 inch bit at the depth. But what I want to do, I'm going to drill a couple smaller holes. I'm going to build up I want to get this centered. Perpendicular as possible. Go to a thicker one. And what this does, it helps if you don't have a drill press and a way of mounting these, you drill a small hole. It's easier to control, to get in the center, and to keep straight, perpendicular. So you drill a small one, and you drill a little bit bigger. And I'm going to step it up one more time. That's what this is referred to as stepping up. Hold it. Okay. And then finally the 1/2 inch hole. So I put tape on there, so I got to the right depth. So now that'll go on there, and when we apply adhesive, it'll stay there. So we've done that to one. Now we're going to do the same thing to the second one. I'll change the camera angle so you have a different view of it. Start off with a small bit. Square it up a little bit better. Small one doesn't bite as much. Yeah, this is the messy part. It looks like I definitely went deep enough. So we'll have to back some of those off. All right, so I need to clear some of this off, and So if you're wondering, I went 9/64 to 7/32 to 3/8 to ½ inch. I don't know that the exact sizes matter. You just need to start small, step your way up. The more steps you take, the easier it'll be. Okay. Now I got a little bit of clear space, so I'm going to take this. Now, you want to dye these before you do this process, because if you attach the scroll, and you don't have to, we're going to talk about how to put this together without attaching it. So what I'm going to do, find a thin brush. I'm going to get glue down in there. Doesn't take a lot. This is a very tight hole, but you want enough coating on there that it bites. Okay, so what I did is I put PVA. You can use wood glue. Honestly, Elmer's glue. It's going to work. So I'm going to put that on there. I'm going to put this on there. Now we already determined that, where'd my scroll go? That my scroll, I need to back these off a little bit. That one bit really good. You want to make sure there's enough room for your scroll. There. So that's it. So what I'm going to do with this is now, let's go this way. Umbilicus with the finials or finals. And this needs to dry. So we're going to set it aside while we talk about the leader cloth and some form of wrap. All right. There's a couple different ways of going about this. Now, sometimes you may have seen scrolls that have a piece of cloth linen at the start, and that helps wrap. Now with my shirt is dark, so this is kind of what we're looking at here. We'll switch views so maybe you see it better on the bench. When you're rolling your scroll, it gets covered by this cloth and it helps protect it. And you just wrap it up and there you go. So this one, the person didn't want it. They wanted just a basic scroll without any leader. Now, this is the protective wrap. There's another part where when you attach to the scroll, you can glue the papyrus directly to the umbilicus. That's fine. You know it's going to be permanent. That's great. A lot of them were not attached. They just use it to help roll. And I feel that having some linen cloth at the beginning helps it bite a little bit better. So what we're going to do, I have some linen here, and we're going to make a leader and we're going to make a protective wrap. All right, so here is what I'm going to use for the leader. You can get linen by the yard at your local fabric shop, or you can order it online. Order it from a bookstore, a bookbindery supply shop. You're going to pay a little bit more. They call it aircraft linen. But honestly, some just standard undyed natural linen from Joanne Fabrics, or whatever your fabric choice is. This is the way to go. All right, so for the leader, I want it the same width as my scroll. And so what I'm going to do is put it down here. I'm going to mark right there. And I'm going to mark there. You don't want it thicker than your scroll, but you do want it within reason. I am going to use scissors. You can, trying to cut fabric with a utility knife is a pain in the butt. I would recommend getting one of those fabric roller knives. For my particular use here, we are just going to use some really nice shears. I'm going to take this, have a nice line. Do my best. Let's see if I can cut a straight line. Okay, there we go. Now this is a little bit longer than I think is necessary. Probably half this will be fine. So what I'm going to do, we're going to put this. Let's get nice straight edge. Use the same basic rule, and we're going to go left over right, and you want to have a nice little bite. So about an inch worth of paste. And I don't have my mat up here. Use this as keep me in a straight line. Glue that down. All right, ideally, in a perfect world, you're going to put this under weight again, 20, 30 minutes. Put that there. Take the board. I'm using the wax paper as a release layer so the paste or the glue does not stick to the board. All right, so in a perfect world, you want that to dry thoroughly. For the sake of this video, I'm going to let it dry for a few minutes as we're talking, and we're going to Lay this down here to dry. All right, so I'm going to grab this piece. Is this the cutoff? Looks a lot smaller than I need. Did I lose a piece? All right, we're going to work with it anyway. So I'm going to need to make this again. So I wanted the width of my scroll, and then I wanted a little bit more because I don't know that this is historically accurate. It probably is not. It doesn't mean that someone over time hasn't done this. But what I'm looking at is I kind of made, I built in the tie, which isn't necessary. But it's kind of a little feature that I like. So that's what I'm doing. And I also folded in the edges down the length of this, one to wrap around and grip the papyrus here, but also so I didn't end up, since this is the fabric that's going to be exposed. It doesn't have all this linen frayed edges that is very typical of the linen. So this is what we're going to do. And for that, I need a 1/2 inch and a 1/2 inch of overlap so I can fold it. No, actually, I need 1 inch and 1 inch. So while, what did we say this was? 8 and, what is it, 8 3/4, right? Yeah. So you have 8 3/4 plus 1 inch, 9 3/4 plus 1 inch, 10 3/4. So I'm going to take this and say 10, and you know what? This is so close. I'm just going to allow that. Okay. All right. The other thing I'm going to do is I'm going to use 45 degrees on my mat to help me lay out where this is going to be. Now, if I do right there, it's going to come to a point. I don't want it to. I want a little bit of gap for the ropes. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to go 1 inch. So I'm going to take this and I'm going to fold that over, and I'll take this and I'll fold that over. I should probably center it first. That way. So let's see, what do we got here? 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. I want to come over 1/2. All right, so roughly centered. Boom, boom, boom. I'm going to take, I want a decent amount. Line. So this again is hemp. Traditionally, I use a thicker cord, but I am out. I want a nice amount of wrap. Give myself some cord. And we're going to need glue. Need a brush. All right. So for this first part, There's that. Take this, lay that out to bring this up and over. Foam folder, hold this. Need to do this so you can see it. Yeah, push it right up against the rope, a little bit of squeeze out. Okay, and I'm going to grab the other end. Make sure it's not tangled up. Bring that back up. This. Again, I want to quickly push that into the cord. Enough glue on there that I know it's going to adhere. Over here and trim. And you can do the trimming before or after. It really doesn't matter as much. However you're comfortable, however you work. All right. Got a little bit extra paste there. But what I'm going to do now is I'm going to turn my attention this. Now, some of these historically, I've run down the side. These ones here I'm going to trim off. And so let's. So what I'm going to do with this is I know I need to let it dry, but temporarily I'm going to roll this the other way so I can have the other end of my scroll. Roll that up. Now, like I said, ideally you want to let this dry for a couple hours, and as soon as I'm done doing what we're going to be doing here, I'm going to unroll it completely and let the two ends dry off camera. But I'm going to work this so you can see in this session what exactly is going on. Okay. This out, put some weight on it. I'm going to get it in line with some lines on my mat. Push that out, move this closer. All right. What I want to do, get this centered best I can. Everything looks squared up. Pretty happy with that. pull this out. Well, I want it to overlap. I don't want it to overlap that much. All right, so now what I'm going to do glue out. I make this a little bit wider. A little extra glue because the fabric is going to soak some up. I probably could have put it on the other end, but what I'm going to do is bring this around. Not being historically accurate, I'm not super concerned that this doesn't look exactly like the one I showed you. I don't know how they attached it. The one I showed you actually had the papyrus inside getting gripped by this cloth. In this case, I'm just concerned with cleaning up the edge here and making this look good. So and then of course, change this out. If you wanted to reuse this on another scroll, you could just cut it off. Again, at this point, there's no right or wrong way to do this. I don't know that any of this is historically accurate. This is more of a fun little style thing that I do with the scrolls. There. You now have that leader. Roll this up. Again, ideally, you want to let that dry. This wraps around a few times. Okay. So we have our umbilicus. We have our roll, which has the attached leader at the end and the protective wrap on the outer side. So what I'm going to do, finish this for you, is we're going to roll it the other way. So I get the other end, and we're going to tap it the umbilicus. We can't wait for everything to dry. You guys will be here forever. Now the roll is much bigger right now because I have not tightened it. I'm going to shorten this leader. I don't think it really needs to be that long. We're going to this up. That's more than enough material. Okay, so we're looking at here. Take fabric, and we're going to start rolling it. And I'm going to try and keep it as snug as possible. Now, if you want to put a dab or two of glue on the fabric so it doesn't slip, let's see, I can't tighten it this way. So this is going to be as tight as I can roll it. And this is one of the reasons I attach the fabric to the umbilicus. I'll show you the difference. Yeah, see, I can't, it doesn't grab, I can't roll it, tighten it. Okay, so there you go. This is the scroll that we made today. But you can see a little bit fatter than this one. Now, can you imagine if this was 20 long? Yeah. Now, if you attach the leader to the umbilicus, you can take this and tighten it, and it'll snug everything up, because this is the same amount of panels, a much thinner scroll. So we're going to go back and forth. That's unattached, and it's perfectly acceptable. It was very common. But like I said, it's just harder to tighten up your scroll if you want it that way. So now that we have that backed out, so what you can do, take your scroll rod, your umbilicus, coat it up with some paste or glue. I just do it in the center, and I don't do it here or here. I leave myself a little bit of space. And then we're going to do the same thing where I'm going to take this fabric. I'm going to start wrapping it around. You want to be very careful and take your time at this point. Make sure that it's centered, because once it dries, you can cut it off, but what's adhered to the umbilicus is going to stay on the umbilicus. Just snug it up a little bit. PVA is pressure sensitive, so you want to make sure you put lots of pressure on it. Now, as we roll this up, actually gripping on the umbilicus, and it'll allow you to roll it a lot easier. Now, if you're going to put 2 umbilicus on here, obviously you don't want to attach that tie leader that I made. You would do, you'd make something similar to it, but just do it as a wrap. Honestly, if you just cut a rectangle out of the linen, that would work just fine. And you just wrap it and put your tie on it. And like I said, traditional either ties would have been leather or linen strips, ribbons, if you will. And I think hemp is also acceptable. I don't know if it's 100% historically accurate, but they had hemp back then. So I can't imagine it not ever happening. So now you can see I can tighten this right up. You don't want to get super, super tight, but and I just put my thumb underneath it and go around one more time. I put my thumb underneath it and I just pull it underneath. Boom. Now, this is a finished scroll. It's ready to go. This is it. When I'm done with this video, I'm going to unroll it and let everything dry without being tightly wrapped. But as you can see, it's much smaller than if you didn't attach it to the umbilicus. Now, the other thing you can do is I use a thicker hemp cord usually, and with a thicker hemp cord, you can do things like fray the ends, and you can attach beads or whatever to it. You can adorn it any way that you please. Again, not saying it's historically accurate. I'm just saying you can. I have lava beads that I usually put on it because I like having a little bit of weight. I put a knot and I fray out the end just so it gives it a little bit of texture. So at this point, it's more of an artistic vision on what you want your scroll to look like. You could use leather to wrap it with if you wanted, whatever you want. So here you go. This is the scroll complete. I want to say thank you for taking the time to watch this video. This is the first demonstration of 2024. This was actually supposed to happen last year. So if you were supposed to have this demonstration last year, I appreciate you being understanding. I appreciate everything. I look forward to having you in more demonstrations, workshops, etc. I don't know how many more I'm going to have this winter, spring. More than likely, I'm going to use the information from the 4 or 5 that I have now to make things better, and I'm going to regroup and do this in the fall. So look for new announcements, that kind of thing, and we'll have some fall classes. If you're watching this on Patreon, thank you, because I know you're on a paid tier, and I hope this was educational for you. I want to let you know that the bookforge.online website has a bunch of other courses if you want to take them. You're watching this recorded. The folks who are at the demonstrations or workshops are getting things live. This particular one, everyone had something to do. I had a couple people chime in saying, sorry, I'm not going to be able to stay, but they're very excited to watch the recorded video. But normally there would be some interaction. I had a nice conversation with Karen Hamner, who is an incredible bookbinder instructor. She's done a lot of Society of Bookbinders Standard of Excellence videos, which I used when I was learning how to BOOKFORGE. Incredible resource. Very modest woman. I look forward to taking some of her courses, actually. So, hey, this video has gone on long enough. I want to thank you very much. I am Edward Kranz, a Honey Badger binder of BOOKFORGE. This has been Egyptian Papyrus Scrolls, and I hope you've enjoyed. Thank you very much. Thank you.